Tell me your name and what brings you out here today.
My name is Dr. Debra Durham, and I'm a primatologist with PETA, and I'm here to let people know about the abuse of animals at the University of Washington.
All right, and why have you singled out this particular facility?
We've singled out this facility here on Western Avenue because it's a facility that tests very dangerous pathogens in monkeys, and the abuses here are particularly egregious. One of the most disturbing incidents we learned at this facility involved exsanguination practices that were completely unauthorized. They were a violation of guidelines established by the Office of Laboratory Animal Welfare. And in these procedures, multiple monkeys were subjected to them. They were essentially bloodletted until they were on the verge of death. The animals were gasping for air, in cardiac distress, and going into shock. And the researchers would simply take as much blood as they could before the animal died. They would keep them alive and do it again the next week. And these are entirely unauthorized procedures, and we're horrified that the University of Washington would let activities like this go unpunished. The individual who was actually in charge of these experiments is a member of the university's Institutional Animal Care and Use Committee, the committee that's supposed to have oversight over animal experiments at the University of Washington. And we're horrified that a man who would do this is given authority and oversight over animal activities.
Now, did you find that this was an anomaly, or is this the norm for this facility and or the university itself?
Unauthorized procedures are amazingly frequent at the University of Washington. We have dozens of instances that involve unauthorized surgeries, the use of unauthorized drugs, the use of unauthorized studies, and it's actually shocking how frequent this is. And these violations range from using animals without permission to killing them without permission. And sometimes they can't even get that right. There were several instances where animals were supposedly euthanized and put in a dead animal freezer, and people later found them to be alive. And it's really, really appalling.
And how does the university and this facility compare to other universities and facilities?
I find the violations here at the University of Washington particularly egregious. There are facilities that have more USDA violations than the University of Washington, but those aren't facilities with as much money as the UW. The UW receives the second most money in public health service funds of any U.S. institution, second only to Harvard. So to have these violations at an institution that receives so much government support, I think makes it especially troubling.
So what, based on your knowledge, what would have been the proper response to, for instance, the experiment you first talked about where they bloodlet the animals to such a degree?
Well, clearly that individual should not have permission to work with animals. They were given permission to take 10 milliliters per kilogram of weight each week, and that's an extraordinary amount of blood. So for example, a person can donate a pint of blood every 2 months, and if a person was put on this regimen, they would have 6 liters of blood taken out of in that same period. It would prove very, very lethal for people to be involved in this procedure. And to think that someone could violate even that level and then continue to have permission to use animals and actually have authority to give other people permission to use animals is shocking. I think the individuals involved should have been suspended and had their authority to use animals permanently revoked, because they're killing animals. They represent an extreme threat to their very lives. At the very least, they should have disclosed the fact that these violations are taking place, and the university definitely doesn't. All of these things happen under wraps, and they're just hoping that people don't notice and that they can continue to do more and more deadly experiments here in our backyard.
What oversight mechanisms are currently in place, and what oversight mechanisms would you like to see in place?
The current oversight mechanism is the Institutional Animal Care and Use Committee, which is a committee that's mandated by the Animal Welfare Act, which is enforced by the United States Department of Agriculture, in terms of giving permission for animal experiments at the University of Washington. This committee obviously doesn't do much given the dozens of violations that take place at the UW, and their very severe nature. I honestly don't think there's any oversight that could be good enough to manage animal experiments, because I don't believe animals are ours to exploit in experimentation. But while that is legal, and while we continue to work to change that, the minimum protections should involve oversight by groups that include animal protectionists, people like me, people from organizations like PETA and NARN, for example, here locally, who would actually be advocates for the animals and have authority to say, no, this experiment is too painful, no, this experiment is useless, no, this experiment is duplicating prior work. Because right now, the AWA does not have authority to do that. They do not deny permission to do any experiment, no matter how painful, no matter how deadly it might be. And that's something that has to change.
So when a particular scientist is found to have, committed a violation, does that then go on record, their record of some sort?
Violations are almost always responded to with what's called a letter of counsel, which is simply a letter from the IACUP to the investigator that describes the offense and tells them not to do it again. And that letter does become part of their University of Washington record in terms of their permissions to do animal experiments. So once someone's committed a violation, next time they ask for permission to do experiments, the committee could see the fact that they'd had a violation before. However, this is not part of their personnel record, and there's no federal database such that if someone commits a violation here at the University of Washington and leaves and goes to join the faculty at Harvard, their history of animal abuse and violations does not follow them. And they can continue to commit abuse in other institutions. And that's sometimes the case, that a problem employee will go from place to place until they're sort of shot out by disciplinary action. And it just sort of creates a perpetual problem in terms of animal abuse. And this is with investigators, with veterinary staff, and with technician level staff that are used in animal care operations.
So it sounds like we really need a national database to keep track of all this.
A registry of offenses by individual investigators and by institution, so that it's easy to find out when violations have taken place, and activist groups don't have to spend months making Freedom of Information Act requests to find out what kind of abuses are taking place. Universities should be forthright about what's happening and forthright about the disciplinary actions that are taken.
All right, how can people find out more about these issues?
People can find out more about these issues by visiting stopanimaltests.com. And there's lots of information about the abuse of animals in laboratories and alternative methods that do not involve animals. So where scientists are using progressive methods that are non-animal based.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.